And welcome to this live stream number 69. Today's topic is rendering for absolute beginners with Fusion 360. It is October 4th, 2017. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's live stream. We haven't gotten anybody in the live stream just yet, so if you're watching this, you're watching the recording. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that. So, if you go down in the description area of the video, you'll find my email address, lars.christensen@autodesk.com. You're definitely more than welcome to send me any future topics you would like to see. See where we got people coming in? Thank you so much, guys, for taking the time out of your busy day to join today's live stream. Today's live stream is a little bit later than usual. Got a little busy meeting stuff going on, so now it's actually dark outside if you normally are joining the live streams. Normally there's some light. Let's jump into it. Let's talk a little bit about rendering with Fusion 360. And I want to kind of, most of the times when you're talking rendering, you're thinking of like, okay, we got this new product we want to launch or something, and you're thinking like commercial kind of product, a watch or something like that. And how do you make it look more real? And that's definitely a great application for using rendering. Now, I have a couple of examples where rendering have been used a little bit different, not just to impress your friends. I actually have one story that I just wanted to share with you because it's kind of like going to be a little bit of the theme today. One time we were quoting a job that we really would like to get with a new company, a new potential customer. And we really wanted to try to kind of like impress them a little bit. So instead of just sending them an email telling them, all right, 50 pieces of this part milled would be this much, 100 pieces with this much, just like a standard email. We actually took the model, the CAD model that they had sent us, and we rendered it in our software and sent them kind of like a rendering of their part and said, just to kind of like be a little bit different than the another 100 quotes that came in. And we did not get that job, but we did get the next job that was actually bigger than the first one. So, think of these rendering not just to make pretty pictures for a commercial product or to impress your friends. You could actually, I know some people who send them with every quote or kind of like just to try to do something different, putting them on their website and stuff like that. Enough talking. Let's get in the software. So, I just did a video that I set up on the YouTube channel of this part. So I thought we would use this part because it's not something like, if you go out and you search YouTube, there's a lot of great rendering videos out there, but I feel most of them is kind of like something that's just supposed to, knock your soft socks off. And I want to show something a little bit different. So I really left it inside the CAM workspace. We're not going to be in the CAM workspace for this. One thing I like to do, though, when it comes to doing these rendering, is I actually like to not use my original model, and I'm going to show you later on why. So what I like to do is to go out and do a save as, and then just give it another name. Let me just save this and get out of our... Oh, actually it was called up. Okay. So there's our original here. And then our new one comes right up here in the tree. So I kind of like separate the two models out. All right. So this is an absolutely beginner. So if you've never used the rendering inside of a Fusion, I will kind of like take you through kind of like the different steps. And by the way, there's some people who's watching these live streams who are absolutely awesome at these rendering. Feel free to share any of your models either in the live stream or in the comment area below. So this is the render workspace of Fusion 360. And down in the bottom down here, you kind of like get a rendering catalog that will kind of like in a few seconds give you a couple of shots of this model here. And this is also where many of your renderings will end up. I'm just going to minimize it by hitting this little box here because I want to get my interface. Now, I'll take you quickly through what each of these kind of does, and then we'll go back in and play with them a little bit later. So the first one, you may be this beach ball you might already be familiar with. That's the appearances. And it's the same appearance as we have if we were inside on the model environment. We right click and we do appearance. Actually, you will see I've already have an appearance on this model right now. I made it blue. By default, it is steel inside of Fusion. But for that cam tutorial I just did, I just wanted to look a little bit different and not gray. There's enough gray on the shop floor. So that is the standard appearance. Then we have this scene setting. So this has to do with kind of like the surroundings around our model. We can also place decals in here, like you know how we have actually done that in a couple of live streams in the past in the standard model environment. I'm going to keep going back and forth here. If you go to the insert, you will see you have the same one in here. Insert decal, same thing. You can insert an image. Then we have this texture map control. We're going to come into that. But if I hover over it, you'll see we get this little drawing of a propeller. So that propeller is made out of wood. And what we can do in texture map controls is we can kind of like control in what direction that grain maybe would go in. Then we got a couple of helpful tools here. There's something called in-canvas render. And then there is an in-canvas render settings. Now if I jump into the settings for a second, there's two different kind of modes. There's a fast one, and then they call it advanced, but it's just a little bit higher quality. You see if I click fast, it says materials and lighting are simplified. We're going to come into this in just a second. Another thing I wanted to make sure, and I'm going to highlight it later, there's also a lock view. That's one of my favorite settings. I'll show you that in a second. So this is this in-canvas render. And what happens is that when you click on this, it will render inside, it will pixelate this model inside of this screen. What is really just used is so you can kind of like get an idea of what is happening with your final render. Because when we are done with setting everything up, then the last thing you click on is the render button here that will then create a JPEG or PNG image that is what our final result is here. That's what we're looking for, is a nicely looking image we can use either on a website, to a quote, whatever, impress your friends, whatever you're up to. So, in here by default, you're kind of like thrown into this space. And, you know, and I'm not going to, again, you know, we can definitely do other live streams where we go more in depth in things. But I wanted to give you kind of like what I think enough tips to kind of like get you going if you have never played with it. So the first thing is your appearances. Maybe also the most kind of important thing here. So you can click on the appearance, open up the appearances in here. Now right now, by default, it is that blue color. But I could bring it back to the original satin just by dragging and dropping. That's the normal color inside of Fusion. But of course, you have all these different appearances that you can actually play with in here, and we're going to play a little bit with the different ones. The next one is scene settings, and this is pretty important, and I'll just take you kind of like through some of the different things. First thing is brightness. Probably don't want to play with that one in the beginning, but really what it just is, we can kind of like brighten up and you see here that it's kind of like brightening up the part in here. The background doesn't change color with this. It's really just the model. 1000s is the default. Then you will see an interesting thing here. If I click this positioning here, we actually get this dialog. And if I grab this rotation bar, you will actually see what happens here. You see how the shadow of the model is kind of like being moved around. And that kind of like goes in relationship to a environment. And the best way I think I can explain this is actually by telling you that this model right now is living within a dome. Think of like a big sphere or a big dome around the part. Now, if I right now, just hit reset here. If I right now get out of the position, if I spin this one up and down, you will see that even though that I'm kind of like rotating around the model, everything, I'm just rotating the model around. But if I change my background from a solid to what is called an environment, you see that something changed on the screen here. And if I now spin the model around, you'll actually see, whoa, what is that? That's like lights, like if you're going to get your photograph taken, right? There's a light right there. So the model kind of like lives within, let's see here, fit. The part lives within this dome environment, and you can control that on the second tab. And there's a lot of them in here that you can all play around. So the default is sharp highlights. There's some cool, so if I click here, you just drag them in and it will change. So you can see how like I can change kind of like the lighting scene in here. Now right now you guys are like, okay, this is all great, but what about these other ones? Yes, if we drag this one in, we will suddenly see that we are in a plaza. And if I roll around on the mouse, you will actually see that it looks like we are somewhere else. And that is kind of like that dome that we are living in here. And there's all different kinds of ones in here. There's like some you can download. You can just click here and you can download them. It doesn't cost anything. One called Snowfield. Same kind of idea. But this is kind of like an environment that is a dome around the part. This kind of stuff is really great. Let me get the plaza back on. This stuff is really great if you're trying to render something like this plaza here has probably been used the most. If you like see a rendering of a car or something like that, that's when maybe you know you will place the car on this plaza here, and you got a couple of options. We go back to the settings tab. There's a couple of things you know of. There's, for example, flatten to ground, and you will see that as soon as you do that, the model kind of like jumped to be flat to the ground. So the software is smart enough to know kind of like where that ground level is, and you can flatten to that ground. But let's be honest, this model here, it would be a little bit weird if I sent this to a customer sitting in the middle of a plaza here. That wouldn't really make much sense, right? So the environment in here, for us in here, we maybe want to switch over to something more, you know, I guess more professional to this part. So I'm going to take Photo Booth and drag that one over, and it gets a little less boring to look at, but probably maybe a little bit more realistic. Again, I can go back to the settings tab. It's flattened to the ground. We can also turn reflections on, and when I do that, we will actually see we get a little bit of a reflections in the bottom here, and you can turn that up and down. It's maybe not so obvious on the Photo Booth, but some of the other ones you can turn that on. Now, another thing you need to know is that there is a camera in here, so you can change like the focal length of the part. So you can kind of like adjust that. I normally don't play with this. I pretty much use the standard. Same thing with exposure. You can play around with exposure. I am not, you know, the biggest camera guy. Depth field is another one that can be kind of nice to use, but I would say more on bigger, if you have a big part that you're trying to render. So like, you know, again, a car or like some big machine or something, you maybe want to use the depth and field. When you check that one, you get to place a depth and field area with a little dot on the screen. You can see there's a little dot here wherever I click, and then it will add blur around that. So kind of like if you're looking far away looking at something, I normally find the blur is too high. I normally have to turn it down. But for such a small part like we're doing here, I probably wouldn't even turn it on. And by the way, you can always hit the reset button down here. You can save it to a default. You also got some aspects radios. Play more around with this in here. But it's important that you know the environment that exists in here. We're going to come back to that in a little bit later. Now, so then when we're looking at this model here right now, so we kind of like, we put the steel on it. We can kind of like go in here. We can play with the environment. You saw we can play with the position of like the lighting, for example, and kind of like figuring out where we want our shadows and stuff like that. That's probably, maybe the most important here when we're looking at this part. Now, if I turn on the in-canvas rendering over here, and you'll be turning this on and off to kind of like get an idea you are going to get, you will see that the image here gets kind of like pixelated right now. And down in the bottom here, you kind of like have a counter that is counting how long it's running and the duration number of its processing these different pixels. And then you will see there's an excellent, final, and infinited. And there's actually a little triad down here. It might be hard to see on the live stream, but you can turn this down. Like, excellent might be, right now I'm just kind of like trying to get an idea about what I'm looking at the screen. So I might just turn it down a little bit so it stops when it comes to that little trigger down here. You can also hit the pause, of course. But now it will stop when it kind of like hits this one and say I'm done. And then you see now the play button is ready here. So now that's kind of like how fine it's going to do it here and give us kind of like a view of what we have. And again, this in canvas is just really like just giving you an idea about what you have before you go to actually render out, because render is going to take a little bit more time, as you will see just in a second. So this in canvas is something that you many times turn on and off in here. Now, I want to go back into the settings of the in canvas and just show you something. So it says there was an advanced, that was the one we just used, and there's a fast one. The fast one goes a little bit faster down here because it really has simplified the material and the lighting. You can see how the model kind of like also changed. But still, fast can be great, especially if you have a big model and you're trying to dial things in, because that's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to dial things in to make it look really nice. I'm going to switch it back to advanced, and as soon as I do that, you can see how kind of like everything slows down a little bit. It's going to be nicer review here. So I normally probably running it on advanced or slower process. But what I want to show you here is the lock view, because what happens is that if I move the model right now, you will see that every time I move the model, doesn't matter what I'm using, my mouse or whatever, it starts recalculating. So with lock view, if you have that one triggered, and that was in the settings here, now as it's doing this, I cannot move the model. And it comes down here and says, hey dude, the view is locked, so just chill for a second. And the reason I'm pointing that out is I always, so you're out of in canvas, you're kind of like, you applied your settings, you're all good, and then you're like, ooh, now I want to see what I get, and you kind of like hit in canvas and it's dialing, and then you're like, ooh, maybe I should rotate it, and then it does it all over again. You're like, man, I didn't want it to do that. So the lock view in here kind of like helps with that you don't, you relax for a second and let it do what you want it to do. Okay. So let's see here. We went through the textures, so that's pretty appearances. We talked a little bit about the scenes. We're gonna go back to decal, texture a little bit later. And then we have the in canvas, but it's helpful. Again, it's calculating right now, making it better. Now, here's my problem when it comes to rendering. Have been one of my problems, and that have been that this image that you're looking at right now, if I render that out and give you a picture of that, you probably are gonna be a little bit disappointed. This here is gray on gray. It doesn't really look great. We talked about that we could go in and change the appearance, the environment, right? We could go in and change to one of the ones that was a little bit more exciting, maybe. But again, this is really not, what I'm looking for. Like somebody by accident, this part fell out of their pocket and landed on the ground. So here is one of the things when it comes to rendering, and probably one of the best tips that I ever got from a good friend of mine And that is that when it comes to make decent looking renderings, the trick is not just putting your pot in there and render it. It's kind of like what is also around it. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it like that. So whenever we see something appealing somewhere, you know, there's other things around it. If you just saw a rendered iPhone, it wouldn't look great on like a billboard or something. But you know, you never see that. You always see somebody, you know, who's interesting, who's holding it, or something in the background, and that's really what's gonna make the render kind of stand out. So let's take a look at that. So what I actually like to do when I render is to not be in the render mode in the beginning. Because what we're having right here, and I see I'm already moving it, it comes up. Every time you see this, the view is locked, is because I'm trying to move the model around. The reason that most of these renders looks, if you have problems getting them to look really appealing, is because they're just sitting out here in like a space. There's nothing kind of like surrounding that. The easiest way to work around that is actually creating your own kind of like environment or your own, I don't know, frames or whatever. I don't know what you want to call it. Check this out. I'm going to get out of the render environment. I'm going to go into a model environment. So there's our model. And this is one of the reasons that I name my files. I don't use my original files. I'm going to go in here and open up a sketch on the side of this part. And then I'm literally going to create, just with some lines, nothing fancy here. I'm literally going to create a, oh, I got my default settings on here. A environment, like a line that goes across here, maybe to around here, up here. And this doesn't have to be accurate at all. Just something crazy like this that is sitting right here. And then I'm going to extrude that. So hit Q. And I'm going to go symmetrical, because it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to make this big block like this here. And I'm just going to make sure, I don't want to join it. I'm going to make it a new body or a new component. It's not going to be joined into the model, so make sure you do that. So now we kind of like have this place sitting here. And I'm just going to zoom in. This should be pretty good, I think. So this kind of like gives us a floor or a table, and this kind of like gives us a wall. Now let's go back into the rendering environment. So we come in here and we're looking at this, and we can see that we're kind of like, the photo booth is maybe, you know, it doesn't look fantastic right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our appearance here. And I am going to go and find a wood surface. I'm going to grab a finished wood surface. And again, there's all these different surfaces in here. You can download by hitting the little arrow over here, whatever you want. I'm going to take this cherry and I'm going to click face up here. So I'm placing it only on the face. And I'm going to drag it over on this surface here. That actually kind of like lightened everything up a little bit, right? Kind of like made it look like there's a surface here. And for the back wall, I actually prefer to go up and use some kind of a paint color. And you can play around with whatever kind of like works the best for you. I'm going to go in with a glossy. And I'm just going to get a white glossy paint. Yeah, white is good. And I'm going to drag that up on that face up there. Kind of like lighten that up a little bit. So now I kind of, if I zoom out, you can see how we kind of like created this environment here. Zoom in so we can't see the edges. And now we can go back into our scene setting in here. We have it on photo booth. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not. But let me hit position. And, you know, maybe we want to kind of like look at some different rotations on this and kind of like see how we like. Ooh, that's the light shining right on it. So you can kind of see how we can play around with this. We can actually kind of like move the lighting sources a little bit. We can scale things. So play around with this and try to get a good kind of lighting on your part to see where that kind of like fits. And I don't really know what will be really good. I'm going to leave it right here for now. Now at this point, we could of course go in and hit that in canvas render again and just kind of like get an idea about what we're gonna get out of this. I'm gonna run a little long today, so sorry about that. Going for the half an hour. So we can see here how it starts rendering this out here and kind of like gives us a preview that looked halfway decent maybe. Now I'm not gonna wait for. We could try to go in and do the faster one and see how that maybe will, if that's gonna look a lot better. Turn that on. Now I do see with this material here, and my mouse is kind of like highlighting, I do see a reflection. I don't know if you can see the reflection in here. What may be because we're doing it fast, but it could also be because that steel has a high reflection in it. So just so you know that, and this is something we can get back into a lot deeper later on. If you right click on a material, and this is going to be different for different types of materials. We should definitely do another live stream of this. But if you right click on a material in here, you can actually go in and edit. And you can actually turn the roughness up or down on it. So if I make it rougher, then we will get less shine in it. And you can hit the advanced, and then you actually come in here and you get a lot more options in here that you can do. And this, it depends on different materials in here. So you can really play with a lot of this in here. One of the things I want to show is this texture in here. So I'm actually going to go, because steel don't have, that steel don't have any texture to it. But if we go into a brush linear short, that might actually have it. So let's apply that on here. So now we applied that into it. Now let me get out of the in-canvas render and let's zoom in a little bit. I hope this shows up on the live stream, that you can see here how we got lines from this brushed material right now. That is what this texture map control can be used to. So if I click on that and I select the component, you will see the projection type right now are automatic, but you can actually do it like planar, and then it looks for an axis that it wanted to do around. So if I select this axis here, you will see that now actually something is going planar that way, almost like you slice through the part. See, if I rotate the planar rotation, you might see kind of like how that works. So you can control that this way. You can turn it into a box, spherical, maybe look a little weird for this. Cylindrical is also an option. So this gives us an option to kind of like play around with the textures in here and kind of like make it look more what we want. I'm gonna leave this for right here and then just, you know, bear with the final result. So this here, you know, we've given, by putting this wooden plate underneath it and maybe give it a little bit of a different texture, we probably are kind of like playing around with making this a little bit more interesting. Now, to add to that, here's a neat little idea. I actually created a drawing of this, a pretty poor drawing. I admit that. I created a PDF of this part a little bit earlier. Put our YouTube logo in there. And so now with that, if I change that into an image, I can add that with a decal. So if I click on that, select the face I want it on. I want it on the table. Select the image. That's going to be the one on my desktop right there. And then it's going to bring it in here. Now, you get a lot of options in here. You can scale things, and I can do that on this little one over here too. So let me just try to move this around a little bit. Oh, I have the in-canvas on. That's why it takes so long. Turn that off. right? So if we do something like this, I don't know. That might make it a little bit more interesting, having like the drawing and the part sitting on the table here. Turn the in canvas on again, so it kind of like starts rendering it. That makes the whole thing, you know, a little bit interesting. Now I maybe don't want the reflection as you see over here on the part here, but this looks a little bit more interesting. Now you will see that the brushed doesn't look great in here, but remember we are on the fast one. If we go to the more advanced one, you will probably see as it's solving this that it will get a little bit better. Another thing I wanted to show is when you are placing the like your angle of how you're looking at the part, try not to be like perfectly isometric. Like if I click on the globe up, it don't be like straight one down, like straight on, like of course don't be top down, like that is not gonna, well, I don't think that's gonna look too great. But also don't use just like the isometric views that comes in here. Maybe try to kind of like find an interesting angle. Now if you and you know, if I did this, then the part's gonna fall off the table. So kind of like try to play around with this a little bit. And again, these renderings don't have to become 100% perfect either, right? You can do multiple of them. You can try different things. When we get to the point where we are happy or we think we are close to what we want, that's when you can go in and say we're going to do final render. Now you get different options in here, and I definitely recommend that you look into the different options. But two things you need to know. You can choose either to do a cloud render or you can do a local render. The difference between the two is that local render means that now your machine is going to do all the solving for this part. The cloud render, you're sending it up to the cloud, and up there on the servers up there, it's being rendered. What means that now you could render, you know, 5 or 6 different views of this and still work on your laptop. If you're on local render and you start rendering, you might just find out that everything slows down. There is, everybody who downloads the free version of Fusion 360 do get, you have some cloud credits. You can see that this will require 2 cloud credits on the final stage of quality. That's the second thing you need to know. There's a standard quality and there is a final quality. Standard quality costs only 1 cloud credit, and there's a frequently asked question right here too. And final costs 2 cloud credits. You know, I honestly, standard to me is normally good enough for what I do. And if you go in here, you will see how many cloud credits you have. You can buy more cloud credits if you're running out of them. But you should already go in here, you should see you already have some. And then when you're happy with what you got, you hit render, and then the rendering starts. Now the rendering will appear down. Remember how the first thing I did was I closed this little window down here? It will actually appear down here whenever this is done. And depending on how busy, I'm doing it up on the cloud right now. You know, it's going to take 5, maybe even just a few minutes. You know, for something like this, I would say less than 10 minutes for sure to render this out. And of course, I could also, again, we could go in here, there on the advanced, and we can hit the in canvas, and we can kind of like see what we're getting in here right now. So I really hope that this kind of gives you an idea what you can do with this rendering tool. And I hope that you know, you will, I mean, think about how you can use this at your shop to kind of like, or your company or whatever, to kind of like try to make, you know, some cool images that you can use either as marketing on your website, your brochures, send to friends to impress them, or you know, for quotes or other stuff. It is pretty straightforward to go in here and set it up. Go out and look at the gallery too, the Autodesk gallery. There's some people in there do much better work than I think that I ever do. But the trick about kind of like creating that boundary, that L shape I did, and place the parts in, I really think makes a huge difference for that. So I'm still waiting for my cloud render to come back here. I don't think it's gonna come back possibly before I'm gonna run out of stuff to talk about. So what I'm gonna do is that when it's done rendering, I'm gonna take that PNG and I'm gonna throw it down in the description area of the video. So if you're watching the recording, go down there and click on it. You can see the final result. Like I said again, I would probably, if I was going to do this, I would probably do maybe 5 different renders with some different lighting. We tried the photo booth, maybe try some of the other lightings in there, play with the position of it, the shadows, and kind of like trying to get all that right. It seems like that's how it goes for me, that I got to do like 5 or 6 of them and then